Welcome to Weathering Minds, where we unravel how the weather outside affects the weather inside your mind. I'm your host, Daisy Whittington, and today's topic is going to be the psychological impact of weather events. But before we get into that, since this is our first episode, let's talk a little bit about how Weathering Minds came to be. Well, I'm 15, and ever since I can remember, I've always dreamed of being a meteorologist. I love watching the Weather Channel, morning forecasts, or any type of weather-related content I can find. I'm also a huge advocate for mental health and mental health awareness. After being surrounded by these two topics for so long, I started to notice the connection between these two. So many people out there struggle with mental illnesses or disorders that are weather-related, including seasonal affective disorder or SAD, depression, anxiety, and PTSD. Some of these may just sound like normal mental disorders, but actually a lot of people out there have them because of weather trauma, weather anxiety, etc., etc. I realized how little people know about this, and I realized that people deserve a platform where they can learn about it. My goal is to raise awareness, provide insight, normalize conversations about mental health, and hopefully offer coping strategies for these mental health issues. Okay, so hopefully by the end of this podcast today, you'll have learned why these weather events have such a severe mental impact, and hopefully a few coping strategies that you can share with your family, friends, or even just keep for yourself. So, I think we all know that the world is going through an extreme transformation right now. It's called climate change. Extreme weather events such as hurricanes, tornadoes, and mass floods are occurring more and more frequently due to climate change, and these climate patterns are shifting dramatically. Now you may be thinking, how does this have anything to do with mental health? Well, we're going to get into that. The WMO, or if you're not a weather nerd, the World Meteorological Organization, reported a 5-fold surge in natural disasters since 1970. Now I know you probably think 1970 was forever ago. That's not a big deal. But actually, when it comes to the mass of natural disasters happening per year, that is significant. Simultaneously, there's been a significant rise in mental health issues. Now, I know what you're thinking. Daisy, you can't just take two statistics about raising mental health illnesses and raising weather. They have nothing to do with each other. But that's not true. This is no coincidence, as mental effects of direct exposure to weather catastrophes can be profound. And that's kind of something I want to dive into, because I feel like when we all think of towns or people getting impacted by weather events, we think of houses getting destroyed or businesses being destroyed, which is awful, absolutely. But it doesn't only affect communities and property. It affects individuals and their mental health and well-being. In fact, studies show that residents in high-risk weather zones face a 9 times higher risk of long-term mental health disorders. So this isn't just some random coincidence. It is a fact that these mental health disorders are much more common in these high-risk areas. Let's take a closer look at some of these areas, because some of us might not know. Texas, surprisingly, witnessed over 84 climate disasters in the last decade. Illinois had $35 million for natural disaster repairs in the last decade, and Missouri, known for its beautiful scenery, averages $4.6 billion annually on climate disasters and climate disaster repair. So if you live in these areas, you are having to deal with nonstop preparation and just mental preparation for these events. And despite their resilience in surviving all these awful weather events, they're enduring a severe emotional toll. And this is a reoccurring cycle of damage and recovery. Yes, it impacts infrastructure, and that is absolutely awful, but it's also impacting everyone's mental health. And this is problem number 1. The residents in these high-risk weather zones are battling for their mental well-being, but let's be real. Imagine living in one of these regions. Preparations like securing property and supplies are gonna take precedence, and therefore mental health preparedness is overlooked. And people have the lack of knowledge and resources to equip themselves with coping strategies or seeking help to prepare for these situations, so when the storm hits, they know what to do to keep a good mental well-being. But they don't. So this lack of awareness leaves people very vulnerable. But so that is problem number one. But what happens after the storm hits in reality? Let's explore the psychological aftermath. Well, as I was deep diving into my weather research like the weather nerd I am, I found this really fascinating study where they took over 40 flood victims, all different ages and all being in floods different time periods apart. Some were in floods 30 years ago, some were in floods 2 months ago. And they interviewed them on how the flood they were in has affected their lives both mentally and physically. And although it was a long study on a lot of the physical aspects, I was really interested in how they were mentally affected. Over 50% of the flood victims that revealed even years later they had enduring effects on their mental health. And victims experienced very high anxiety during heavy rain or any type of somewhat abnormal weather situation. And this anxiety they're having during these heavy rain or other weather scenarios is linked to various mental health issues, such as sleep problems, PTSD, increased stress, panic attacks, and mood swings. So, yes, people are having anxiety, but it's not just a little bit of anxiety when there's rain. It goes over a whole umbrella of mental illness. And to cope, unfortunately, some turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms such as substance, alcohol, and pills to manage this anxiety that they're feeling. Because a lot of them don't even know how to treat it. And that's kind of the point of this is, yes, they might know they have anxiety, they might know that they're having sleep problems, but they might not even put 2 and 2 together that it has anything to do with the flood they were in 2 years ago. And studies show that 33% of natural disaster survivors develop substance use disorders. That's a third. A third of natural disaster survivors develop some type of substance use disorder. So add that all on top of the other mental problems they're having. This is problem number 2. The cycle of mental illness continues without treatment due to their lack of knowledge or even acceptance that they're having these issues. But let's dive into these mental illnesses specifically and see how they are different when they're weather related. One of the most common ones when experiencing trauma from a weather event is PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. If you don't know, PTSD is often experienced after some type of traumatic event and can include panic attacks, flashbacks, and extreme fear reminiscent of that event, and also distress triggers. And you might be thinking, Daisy, when I think of PTSD, I think of a veteran or just someone who went through the army or someone who was in a plane crash, really big traumatic events. And yes, PTSD is most common in those people. But I think we underestimate just how serious these weather events can be when you are in the center. And yeah, so PTSD really is big when it comes to natural disasters. And specific behaviors linked to PTSD can include sleep disturbances, irritability, reckless behavior, and concentration problems. So as I said earlier about the anxiety, it's not just a little bit of anxiety or PTSD here and there. It's affecting their whole lives. And 25% of these directly affected by high-impact disasters can be diagnosed with PTSD. And that's just who's being diagnosed. So if a quarter of people who are in natural disasters are being diagnosed, just imagine the people that don't even realize what they're feeling and getting absolutely no treatment. And I think a great example of this is Hurricane Katrina. We all know Hurricane Katrina, but if for some reason you don't, Hurricane Katrina was a huge hurricane that happened in 2001, devastated lots of areas of the United States, but mainly Louisiana and New Orleans. So following Hurricane Katrina, mental health actually did come up as a conversation topic as a multitude of mental health issues surfaced throughout Louisiana and New Orleans. Disorders such as depression, anxiety, addiction, and PTSD were widespread throughout New Orleans, and one study showed that rates of mental illness doubled throughout Louisiana post-Katrina. Doubled. A really interesting study I found from 2012 said that even 4 years after Katrina, 33% of low-income mothers in New Orleans were still experiencing PTSD. Now, that is a very specific statistic of just low-income mothers, but it does kind of give us some perspective on how this PTSD can affect not just individuals, but these low-income mothers are taking care of children. They might be taking care of husbands. It can affect everyone. And another major issue, as I said, it can affect your husbands or family or whatever, is relationship damage after these extreme events. People often experience damage to their relationships with family and friends in these aftermath of these disasters. One of the main reasons for this is when people can lose their homes, and this is kind of where the physical and mental part of natural disaster effects kind of intersect. When people lose their homes in a hurricane, whatever, that can result in a significant sense of loss, place, and security. Now, to kind of like go deeper into that, I know when I go home, I feel safe, I feel calm, at peace, I can relax, and I think we all feel that way. But when we lose that sense of comfort and just like safety, we don't have that place anymore, especially these more low-income families. The result can be very, very severe, and it can really impact these people's lives when they lose their homes because they just don't have that safe place where they can go anymore. Another one is grief over lost possessions during storms, and this can just build and build and build on the emotional distress these families and individuals are feeling after storms. And as I said, these factors can impact interpersonal relationships. And I'm not going to make it seem like everything is negative. I will be totally, totally honest. Shared trauma can sometimes strengthen bonds. The term shared trauma means two people who went through the same thing or same traumatic event. Sometimes it can really strengthen them because they understand each other, they understand what the other one went through. But more often than not, it does lead to relationship stress and arguments because both people are in more just worse mental states. And in some cases, especially in romantic relationships, it can lead to divorce and separation. So, yeah, I think this does kind of give us some perspective on how this isn't just some small anxiety because you were in a hurricane 3 years ago. This can literally change your life. And now we know how it can impact individuals and their mental well-being. Let's dive back into how this can impact communities. Now, I know I'm kind of going back on my word by saying in the beginning, let's not talk about communities. Like, they're not important right now. I was more talking about the physical disruption of communities, but we're going to dive into the mental impact of communities. So, natural disasters can have a severe mental impact on communities. And the number one thing I saw while researching different communities that were involved in hurricanes or tornadoes or any other natural disaster is a sense of loss of community spirit and disruption to everyday activities. This includes work, school, religious practices, daily life. It's just severely affected and they're not on their normal. They have to have a new normal. Now, I think we all know that term, new normal, COVID term. And actually, I think this is a really good place where we can connect to ourselves if we have not been in a natural disaster or anything like this, where we can kind of understand how these people may be feeling. I know so many of us out there during COVID-19 experienced a sense of disruption to everyday activities. Like, we had virtual school, virtual work, just everything virtual. I think we all kind of felt a bit lost and just kind of like, what am I supposed to do? I can't do anything. Everything's shut down. Like, what am I supposed to do with my life? Well, people in these natural disasters have been feeling this forever. They've been feeling this since natural disasters developed. They're having this sense of loss on top of all the other things happening everywhere, including COVID and things like this. So, yeah, that is kind of one way if you are trying to kind of you personally understand what these people are going through. Try to think about how you felt during COVID and how you kind of felt a disruption to your daily life. And then, yeah. So I think a great example that's actually very relevant right now to this whole disruption of communities thing is the Maui wildfires that are just now happened in August. And if you don't know, in Maui, wildfires devastated it, and it killed 97 people, with 31 still missing. And not only that, the island faced extensive destruction, including over 2,200 destroyed structures and $5.5 billion in damage. So it was very, very severe. I've actually read a lot of interesting articles on Lahaina. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Someone please let me know if I'm not. Lahaina, which was a very hard-hit town and very close-knit community that was hit extremely hard by these wildfires. And certain things in some of the articles I read and interviews from people living in the city really fascinated me, because I think it's things that we don't really hear about often when we are talking about natural disasters. And that is, yes, loss of homes, jobs, and families, but people are contemplating to relocate to the U.S. for better work opportunities, or having to immigrate to other countries, or just having to leave their families behind. And that kind of shows, like, just like, I don't know, maybe this is just me personally, but when I was a kid, I never even thought of people having to, like, leave their homes just because of a wildfire. And I think that kind of shows, like, yes, physically can really impact people, but mentally, I mean, can you even imagine having to leave your home and relocate to another country because your home was destroyed in a wildfire? I mean, I can't even imagine. And that's why this podcast is great. And if you're listening to us, I applaud you, because me and you are on a journey together to understand how these people are feeling and how we can help. And one way you can help is consider donating to Maui United Way. They're an amazing organization supporting the Maui wildfires right now. And this is not a sponsor, but yeah, if you are looking to help support that community, that is a great organization to donate to. But let's return to the broader topic and kind of refocus on to just the broader scale. Since these are going to be kind of short episodes, I know this is our first episode, so there's not really expectations. Most episodes will be around 15 to 25 minutes. So most of our topics are going to be broken into two, a part one and a part two. So today we're going to go into some coping strategies for if you think you're about to be hit with a natural disaster or something like that. But don't worry, we are not done talking about this topic. We are going to have a whole nother episode on it. But for today, we're going to move on to the next part, which is some coping strategies that people can have and use when thinking that they may be hit by a natural disaster. But before we get into that, we're going to take a quick break. So go get a snack, use the restroom, whatever. And when we come back, we're going to discuss some of these coping strategies. So let's get into it. So for coping strategies after you've been involved in a traumatic event like a natural disaster, there are three main types: preparation, self-care, and identifying support systems. And a reminder for anyone out there listening that might have been involved in a natural disaster, there's no right way to feel. So the first would be putting on a face mask, taking a bath, or just taking a breather. Prioritize taking care of yourself and your mental well-being. Healthy eating. You have no idea how much a good diet can not only impact your health, but also your mental well-being. Try to eat nutritious and healthy foods, and you might just see a really substantial difference. This one might seem obvious, but some people might not understand that, is avoiding alcohol and drugs. You need to refrain from using any type of substances that can harm your well-being. So even if you're feeling anxious, you're thinking, man, a cold drink would soothe me right now, that is not the right way to go. Go talk to someone, go sit by yourself, go meditate, whatever. Just don't turn to substance. Next is exercise and simple walks. This may be like kind of cringe, but even a short walk around your neighborhood can have a really positive impact on your mental health and your mood. Help your mental well-being. Build and maintain a support system. This is so important. Finding those people, like I said, that not only you can trust, but just truly be yourself around and have someone to fall back on is so important when you're recovering from any type of mental trauma in a natural disaster. If you have kids, only if you have kids, make sure to communicate with your kids about how you're feeling. And while this may seem like, oh, they're going to be too young, blah, 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 having these emotional check-ins is a way to be a role model to your kids and show them healthy ways to manage your emotions. Again, this one may seem a little like just like petty or like not necessary, but limit your news consumption. Reduce the exposure to constant news updates. And the reason why for this is because news can really give you a negative mindset. It usually tends to show the more negative things in life. And when you're recovering from something as awful as a natural disaster, you do not need that type of negative energy. So limit your news consumption. And oh my gosh, I can't emphasize how important this one is. Manage your sleep. Having a good sleep schedule where you prioritize getting quality sleep, like, it literally can be life-changing. And the way, if you're one of those people that, like me, who really has trouble falling asleep, avoid screens. Just put it down. Avoid caffeine, and definitely avoid alcohol. Doing this, you can establish a consistent sleep pattern, and you'll not believe how much better you'll feel after you've started doing that. Kind of like jumping off that is establish a routine. Create a daily schedule with regular meals, regular check-in points, regular relaxation times. This will really help just kind of put away some of that stress you feel when you're planning your day. And the next one may seem kind of obvious, but it's also, again, important, is avoid making major life decisions. Post-disaster periods are not the ideal time to move or get a new job or have a kid or get a dog. Anything like that, try to avoid. You may think it's going to help, but it might just stress you out even more. And also with that, ironically, is prepare for change. Now, if you're like me or one of those people that hates change, I am not someone who likes change. And that is valid if you don't. But you have to prepare for some changes because it's inevitable once you've been involved in something as serious as a natural disaster. And this is the most important one. I know I've said that like 5 times, but this is definitely the most important one, is seek help when needed. Be aware of your feelings. If you know you're feeling very depressed, very anxious to the point where you can't function and even try these coping strategies, that's when you need to seek some professional help and find people that will know what to do. You can find a local support group. They don't need to be these like rehab centers. I think that's one thing that's a very common misconception. They do not need to be crazy rehab centers. They can be local support groups with people who are also feeling the same way or sharing a similar experience. You can go to one of those centers. There's so many resources for these type of things. And yeah, so that is kind of an abrupt ending. But that is kind of it for today. Like I said, I know I kind of didn't go super in depth with most of these things, but this is only a part 1. We're going to do a part 2 with each of the topics I do. But if you have a topic in mind, please let me know. I would totally love to do an episode on it. If you have any tips or tricks on podcasting, this is my first episode. Please let me know. I would love your advice. And yeah, thank you so much for listening to Othering Minds. Have a good day.